Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the City Update. I'm your host Mark Aaron, Multimedia Design Manager for the City of Danville. On this week's episode, we are going to continue our celebration of Black History Month during the month of February here in the City of Danville. And here on the City Update, the past 2 weeks we've had some wonderful interviews with influential African Americans here in our community with Mayor Saunders during week 1, and just last week we had Reverend Lawrence Campbell of Bible Way Cathedral join us and really share with us some of his time and what he experienced here during the Civil Rights Movement, being a voice for the African American community at that time. Some very compelling stories and thoughts that he shared with us last week. And on this week, we're going to continue honoring influential African Americans here in our community, as my guest this week is Johnnie Fullerwinder. And she was actually the first African American teacher at George Washington High School. She was hired on in 1966 before integration between Langston and George Washington in 1970. So she has a lot of great stories to tell about that time period here in the City of Danville. And she also wrote a book about her experience entitled Failure Was Not an Option, a Test Case in School Integration. She's going to share with us some thoughts about why she decided to put those thoughts on paper and create that book, and share with us where you can find that book here in our community after our talk on today's show. So Ms. Fullerwinder, thank you so much for joining us on today's show. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Well, let me thank you for affording me this opportunity to share some of my experiences on your show.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Fullerwinder, now, as I mentioned, you started at GW in 1966, and of course, as we heard from Reverend Campbell last week, tensions were running high here in the City of Danville when it came to race relations in the early 1960s. Now, you're not originally from Danville, so were you aware of those tensions at the time when you put your application in to teach here in Danville?
Yes, I was, because I am originally from Spartanburg, South Carolina, another southern state. And throughout the South, segregation was the law of the land. So I had those kinds of experiences prior to coming here, so I anticipated being able to see the same type of thing once I got here into Danville.
Okay, so schools were still segregated in Spartanburg at the time?
Schools were segregated in Spartanburg. In fact, I was teaching there science in the high school that I graduated from before I came here, in an all-black school district. They were practicing the concept that they referred to as separate but equal. The separate was okay, but it was far from being equal. And we didn't find those kinds of things out, just how much so, until much later.
Right. Now, obviously you mentioned you were teaching in South Carolina, so this wasn't your first teaching job out of college
No, it was
coming
not.
to Danville?
No, it was not.
Okay, so how many years had you taught prior to coming to the City of Danville?
3 years.
3 years. And all down in South Carolina?
In South Carolina.
Right. All right, so you put your application in to the school district here in Danville, and at the time, of course, we had Langston High School, which was an all-black high school, and we had George Washington High School, which was all-white. I think you mentioned there may have been 6 or 7 African-Americans who had already enrolled at GW after the early 1960s here, 1963, 64. So 66 comes around. You get the phone call or letter stating that you would be making the trip up to Danville to start your career, and I'm sure, as we've shared in previous talks, you thought you were going to be teaching at Langston. Is that correct?
You're absolutely correct. But let me back up a little bit. My husband and I had moved here the latter part of 1965. We were a young couple with our first young child, a young baby at the time, a boy. My husband had received a job offer to teach in Pennsylvania County, in Chatham, a school called Chatham Central Elementary School. Is no longer in existence today. So we had come here for him to work, and of course I was just going to keep the baby. But after being here for a while, I became very lonely, very lonely. And I decided I wanted to resume my teaching career. So we talked it over, and we decided that if I could find someone who would be willing to come into our home and keep the baby without disrupting him from his natural environment, I'd do that. So there was a young lady on my street who had been laid off from the Danville Mills, and she just fell in love with the baby, and she was willing to do that. So once I found out that I had someone to take care of the baby and I wouldn't have to worry about that, I applied for a teaching position in the Danville Public Schools the second year, and that was in 1966. Now, after I applied for that teaching position, I was called in for an interview. The superintendent told me that he was impressed with my resume and asked me a lot of questions. And
Right.
I recall one of the questions being, how do you feel about white students? And without hesitating, my response was, in a classroom, I see students, not color.
Mm-hmm.
And he continued to ask questions about my philosophy of education, seemed like about 1,000 questions at the time. But at the end of it, he says, I think we have a job offer for you here in Danville, but I can't tell you just where now because we're still in the process of assessing our vacancies.
Right.
But we will get right back with you. I was happy.
Mm-hmm.
I knew I was going to get to go to Langston High School so I could get a chance to meet a lot of new people
Right.
and make some new friends.
Yeah.
Several weeks went by and I didn't hear anything. So I called back to ask if they were still considering me because my husband and I were getting ready to return to South Carolina for the summer, for a few weeks.
Right.
So the superintendent, O.T. Barner at the time, said, oh, we have something in mind for you. We have something in mind. Just give us your address where you'll be in case we need to contact you there. And I did that. Well, the letter almost beat me back
Wow.
to South Carolina. I was there about 3 days when I got this letter from the Danville Public Schools. I was so excited. I said to my husband, wow, I'm going to get to teach at Langston High School in Danville. Right. So I opened up the letter and I started reading it. Say, welcome to the Danville Public Schools. Your assignment will be George Washington High School.
Right.
I said to my husband, this has got to be a mistake. That's the white high school.
Right.
Langston is the name of the black school. I was just so sure somebody had made an error.
Right.
So we decided, okay, you got a job. We'll deal with where when we get back, and we did that. When we got back to Danville, we were still concerned, so I called down to the school board office to see whether or not that was the correct assignment.
Right.
And all they did was say yes, but didn't go into any details, and told me what time I was supposed to report. So we began to think. We knew that the federal government was beginning to issue these mandates to desegregate the schools.
Right.
So we decided, well, maybe Danville has decided that they're going to put some black teachers over there at GW, and you're going to be one of them. Well, when I applied, I reported the first day, I never will forget, August 29, 1966. I walked into the cafeteria, which is where they have all of the teachers meeting for the first few days for pre-conference days. About 150 teachers. I don't know if you've been in GW's cafeteria or not, but they had tables lined up around the outside of the cafeteria.
Right.
So I got there a few minutes early, real proud, wanted to make an impression. When I came in, I was directed to where the science teachers would sit because we sat according to departments. So I sat down and being real inquisitive, just started going through the materials on my desk, just looking through materials. And then after a while, as people were beginning to come in, I just started looking around the room. I looked in front of me, looked to the one side of me, looked to the other side of me, and I thought, oh my goodness, I'm in here alone. There are no other black teachers in this room. So immediately I thought, am I dreaming?
I'm sure.
Could this be real? Did I miss something in the interview? Did somebody forget to tell me something?
Right.
Where are the other black teachers? And at that moment, I developed a gigantic headache that must have lasted for an entire month.
I'm sure. I was going to ask you, what gave you the courage and strength to continue after you realized that you were the only African American there?
I think had I been a first-year teacher, I probably would not have been able to handle that. But I had classroom experience, and I was told that I had pretty good classroom management skills, too.
Right.
And I'm not a type of person that backs down easily, even though, granted, this was something I never experienced before. But I kind of sat there in a daze, and I decided, well, I'm just gonna sit this out and see what's happening.
Right.
So then they began the meeting and introduced all the new teachers. Well, a large number of teachers had been hired that year, maybe about 30 or more.
Right.
So they introduced us by departments. There were about 6 new teachers in my department, so I wasn't singled out.
Right.
I was just introduced with
Just
the group.
one of the new teachers, yeah.
So when the meeting was over, I was still half dazed, and I figured I need to get out of here. I got to clear my head. So none of the other teachers bothered to say anything to me. They either ignored me or they became engaged in conversation with each other to keep from saying anything to me at the time. The only conversation I had earlier was with one of the new teachers who sat beside me, and she had come from New York. So her experiences had been altogether different.
Right.
So I got out and I walked slowly down the halls and finally ended up in a restroom. Entered the restroom. There were 2 other teachers in there. So I walked in, and the type of person I am, I spoke. They didn't. And they hurriedly washed their hands and left out of the room. Most of my experiences for the remainder of that day were the same. They either avoided me or they ignored me.
Right.
So I just kind of like kept to myself. And as I slowly moved through the halls, not only did I find myself that day being the only black teacher in that meeting, I didn't see any more blacks in the building.
You were the only one.
Day.
Wow. So obviously, you mustered up the courage, thought you could make a difference, and probably that answer you gave O.T. Bonner, stating that you didn't see color in the classroom, put you in that place, which obviously he thought would be a good idea because you could make a difference. And tell me a little bit about, did you gain the respect of the teachers as time went on?
In time,
Yeah.
I did. But it was very tense at first. With the teachers, I told you that many of them kind of like stood off for me. And I don't really blame them at looking back, because that's the way things were at the time. Segregation out in the city was rampant. Blacks and white just didn't meet. You lived in separate environments. You went to different churches. You didn't use the same restaurants. You didn't go to the same movies. It's just that's the way it was. So, and as painful as it is to admit, during those days, blacks were considered intellectually inferior. So I'm imagining they probably saw me as one having the nerve, consider myself going to be equal to them, and have the audacity to try and teach white students. Because literally I was the first black permitted to teach white students in the Danville public schools. So I think that may have contributed to the way they behave, and those that may have reached forward weren't quite sure as to how their friends would react to them. So they just kind of kept their distance from me for a while.
Now, the students obviously come a couple of weeks later. Now, I'm sure that brought a whole new experience for you and for them as well. Take me back to that time, that first day when you have all white students in the classroom, and of course you being the only African American teacher there in the school.
Okay, prior to that, one of the teachers had told me in the science department, because I got more reaction from teachers there than anywhere else, but I didn't see them that much throughout the day.
Right.
But one of them had told me that she was involved in a conversation with her students during the summer prior to my coming, and discussed the possibility of one day they might have to endure a black teacher. Their response, she said, was they would never accept a A.N. teacher. So that's the kind of mindset before I even got an opportunity to meet them. Well, the first day when they came into my room, I think a lot of them were actually in the room before they realized I was there. It was shock. I don't know if I had more sympathy for me or for my students.
Right.
Some of them came in and they sat. It's obvious they were stunned. Some of them had a frown on their face. Some of them turned their head, looked to the side, and would never look in my direction the entire time I was sitting there. But I decided I was going to address race right up front and try to get that way.
Yeah.
And I recall saying something to the effect, it's obvious that I'm black. That's a term we use quite a bit then, other than Negro. It's obvious that I'm black. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it. But my purpose here is to help make you a much better science student when you leave here than the minute you walked in that door. And if you just let me help me do that to you, it doesn't matter if you like me. I'd love for you to, but if you don't like me, that's okay.
Right.
Just let me teach you. Of course, some of them haven't only experienced minority adults in the servitude capacity, had difficulty dealing with that. Nobody came out and called me names, but at the end of the day, I saw the N word scratched on the desk and the N word written on bulletin boards around the room. I recall calling the roll in one of the classes because we had to make sure we were aware of who was actually attending.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the students chose not to answer.
Mm.
I said, okay, we'll deal with that. This is where my prior teaching experience helped me quite a bit.
Right.
We'll deal with that. So then I said, okay, these names are absent today. So these are the ones I need to send into office. And they, wait, and then they start, wait, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here,
Yeah.
I'm here. I'm
Very
here,
good.
I'm here.
That's smart.
So I was able to use those kind of tactics to kind of
Mhm.
help me along. But that attitude of them really not wanting to warm up to me, it continued for a little while.
Took some time.
So what I did, when I went home, I talked to my husband the first day about, first of all, whether or not I should even stay there and try
Mhm.
this. And I thought, I didn't ask for the teaching assignment, but I was given it. I had strong religious faith. So I felt there must be some reason
Amen.
I was put here.
That's right.
So I'm going to go back. I'm going to try my best to establish credibility and acceptance of a black teacher capable of effectively teaching white and black
Mhm.
students.
That's
And I decided I was not going to ever exhibit any hints of fear. I was going to exude an air of confidence and assurance, walk with my shoulders up and my head held high.
That's great.
Even if I was nervous, they would never know it.
Never
they
show
would
it.
never know it.
Ms. Fullerwinder, we're going to have to take a quick break. When we come back from break, we're going to continue letting you tell your story about the first few months there as you came on board at George Washington High School, being the first African-American teacher there. And, of course, we'll take our viewers up to 1970 when the schools were integrated, because I'm sure you'd like to share your thoughts about that time at George Washington. And also, before we wrap up, we'll talk a little bit more about where our viewers can find your book. As we mentioned earlier in the show, Failure Was Not an Option, a test case in school integration, which they can find here in the city of Danville at a couple of locations. So we want to give those to our viewers as well. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
One thing that makes our day when we're out here on the field is watching Lauren get up to bat. Our daughter loves baseball, and we tried to get her on some teams, and there were some coaches that would include her, but she just never felt right about it. Hitting the ball and then making the other kids wait just wasn't her idea of what baseball was. We thought she would just have to settle for being a fan until Rotary stepped in, and they built this special field. They took an idea of just letting the kids play baseball and made it fit these kids rather than trying to make the kids fit the field. Lauren forgets about what she can't do because they've given her the opportunity to do something that we never thought possible. When these kids get to play ball, their heart is there. They are so excited, and they just get to feel like regular kids. On the phone, I heard her telling her grandmother that she was the luckiest kid in the world.
Rotary gives people an opportunity to help.
Well, welcome back to this week's edition of the City Update as we continue to celebrate Black History Month here in the city of Danville. On the City Update, my guest this week is Johnnie Fullerwinder, who was the first African-American teacher at George Washington High School. And in the first half of the show, she shared with us her thoughts as first being hired in 1966 in those first couple of days. And Ms. Fullerwinder shared with us how she thought she was going to be teaching at the all-black school at Langston, but ended up getting the assignment at George Washington and being the first African-American teacher there in the science department. And Ms. Fullerwinder, I want to fast forward a little bit because 1970 brought on integration. And I know at that point, were you still the only African-American teacher at George Washington High School?
No, I was not. I was not. In fact, during the 4 years prior to Langston and GW merging, my 5th year, there were 4 of us. Before
Okay.
the first year ended, we had a teacher, a Mrs. Gunn, that came over in business from Langston.
Okay.
We had a Miss Williams, a librarian, and then during the course of that time, a Mr. Jeffries in fine arts, who taught art and craft. But by the time we totally integrated, only 2 of us remained, and that was me and Mr. Jeffries.
Okay.
The others had left the
Ms.
system.
Jeffers, okay. Now, what was the hardest thing for you during that time period of being the only African-American teacher at George Washington High School?
I felt the stress. I felt that, as the title of my book, I couldn't fail.
Right.
I felt like I had the weight of the community on my shoulders.
Yeah.
Because
I'm
I
sure.
felt that had I backed out, then it may have been even more difficult for the next person to try and follow me. So
Right.
the worst thing was making sure I didn't fail
Yeah.
at this attempt to integrate.
So, fast forward to 1970.
Mm-hmm.
Both schools are integrated. Talk to me about the atmosphere leading up to that first day in 1970 during integration there. What were your thoughts?
Okay, I was excited, first of all, that they were going to finally bring the schools together.
Right.
Now, I do need to say this, though. Prior to that 1970 merger, a few more students, black students, had come to GW.
Right.
But out of 2,300 students, it still was like a trickle. So leading up to that time, we'd had a few little meetings with the student body at the two schools to help them do things like decide on a new motto, a new school colors, and those kinds
Right.
of things. However, they neglected to do what I consider the most important thing of all, do workshops on human relations for the students.
Yeah.
Now, teachers within their own schools did a little bit. GW did some, and Langston did some, but we didn't think to do that for the students. So when the schools merged, we ended up with about a 70-30 ratio of students in favor of the white majority. When they first came in, you could see whites grouping together and blacks. A few of them mixed, and those that seemed were athletes were kind of mixed. But for the most part, they were kind of doing their separate thing. With the teachers, I felt good. The teachers were mixing.
Oh, great.
There were no problems there, and I was hoping that maybe what I did, get in and make those teachers realize that I was human, because by then a lot of them had accepted me with
Well,
no
great.
problems whatsoever, that it may have helped there. But with the students, it's a different story. So for the first few days, no problems. But I felt that the tension was brewing to bring that many students together at one time without really preparing them.
Sure.
So at a football game one night, a fight broke out, I think. And then it went back into the schools that next day.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about it was that I was out sick when it erupted. And I was thankful for that. I think it would have destroyed me to see that.
Yeah.
But I understand it was terrible. The kids just really got into it physically with each other. So that went on for a while. And then we had to start doing some mediation and start bringing in police officers
Right.
to try to keep them in line. But tension was there. Tensions were there. And you'd go into the cafeteria and you see blacks and whites in separate groups, with the exception of just a few of those mixing together. And here again, I say there were people who were either in athletics, or you'd find some band members who may have been mixing, but for the most part, there was a separation with the students, but not so with the teachers.
When did you see that barrier fall down?
You know, I think it may have begun near maybe the latter part of that school year.
Right.
And because teachers were doing a whole lot to try and minimize it. I know in my classes, I kept the emphasis on instruction. The minute they walked in the door, it was like time on task. This is what we're going to do, and we're going to do it until the bell rings, and then you go out. So we never had any conflicts in my classroom.
Right.
Some of the other teachers who were a bit more timid sometimes, I think, probably experienced some problems.
And by 1970, you had probably experienced everything imaginable at that point.
Yes.
And being a strong-willed woman as you were, coming in and paving the way, really, for those to come after you. I'm real appreciative for everything you did at that time here in the city of Danville, because it obviously made a difference from decades and decades.
But let me say this, though. I made some really good friends over the years with
Right.
students and teachers.
Wonderful.
I had students who actually came by my house to visit me
Right.
after that year was over. But we had to get there.
Right. Well, Ms. Fullerwinder, we've got about 5 minutes left on today's show, and I do want to talk about coming full circle, because you spent 37 years in the school system here in Danville, and you made it back to GW after a stint as a principal and as the assistant principal at GW, and you became the first female assistant principal at George Washington High School in the late 80s and early 90s.
No, not there. But what happened, after being there for a while, about 18 years, I got a job as the first administrator at Gibson Middle School
Okay.
when I became the assistant principal there.
Uh-huh.
And then after 1 year of trying to prove myself, I guess,
Yeah.
I was hired back at George Washington High School as assistant principal, and
Correct.
here's where the overwhelming part came in. I was the first black teacher there. Ironically, my classroom was on the back of the building, as were most of the science classes at that time.
Right.
I left the school and I came back as an administrator, and my office was at the front of the
Oh,
building.
how about that?
And the reception was totally different.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
My, how times change.
Yeah. And then after 9 years in that position, I became coordinator or supervisor of the math and science program for the entire school division and moved to the school board office.
So you've really seen it come full circle, and I wanted to get your thoughts on that before we left on race relations now in the city, in the school system. Have we made great strides?
I have seen changes, strides by leaps and bounds.
Wonderful.
I am so pleased. Now, we have a ways to go, but I am so proud. The color of your skin doesn't seem to make a difference in the classroom anymore. Students don't seem to care the color of the teacher's skin,
Right.
and that's good.
Yeah.
I see students getting along well, parents getting along well. I am so proud of the progress we have made from 1966 to 2011.
That's great. And I do want to talk about your book because the book is available. I know you said at the Listen to Life store, Joey Foster store off of Kentucky Road.
That's
it's available
correct.
there.
That's correct.
And then you also have it available.
And then I also have it available. I have an email address that they can get it from me.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, we've got the email address on the screen for them.
Okay.
They can email you to get a copy. And in the last minute or so, what compelled you to put your thoughts on the paper and compile the book?
Well, actually, students.
Right.
I have been asked over the years to do it, and I put it off. But once I retired, I didn't have an excuse anymore. So I actually sat down while I still had my clear mind and put it into print.
Right. Well, I do invite anyone watching today to please pick up one of the books because we just scratched the surface on the many stories that Ms. Fullerwinder tells in her book. So I think it'd be a great read for any of you out there. And many of them probably had you as a teacher
Yes.
or as a principal or assistant principal. And Ms. Fullerwinder, we really thank you for taking the time to join us on today's show as we celebrate Black History Month. And as you really did pave the way in the school system, being the first African-American teacher at George Washington High School. Thank you for all that you did at that point in time, and then as you made your way through the school system for 37 years, becoming obviously an administrator position there before you retired. We really appreciate all you did for our community.
Thank you again for the opportunity to share.
Thank you. And thank you at home for watching. And be sure to join us next week as we cap off our celebration of Black History Month here in the city of Danville with our special guest, Emma Edmonds, who is a professor at UVA, and she is a local historian who has done oral histories with about 30 predominant African Americans here in our community. She'll be sharing her thoughts on those oral histories that she has compiled over the past few years. She's actually created a website. We'll have that address for you next week where you can go on and listen to excerpts from all of those interviews that she has conducted. So it will be another wonderful interview here next week as we cap off our celebration of Black History Month here on the City Update. So until next week, have a great day.